I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being.
Hello, Darren. Nice to see you again. Nice to be with you again.
Nice to see you on the other side of the planets.
Thank you. We had a fail recently, didn't we?
Yes. Which one of my fails are you referring to?
Well, this wasn't one of your fails. This was a joint fail between both of us. What happened?
Well, we actually had this incredible podcast episode all lined up, ready to go, and we did it. And we finished, and we went, "Wow, that was like our best ever." And then
it was a great discussion, wasn't it?
Great discussion. Like, you know what, you couldn't, it was just so enjoyable talking with you, Simon. I know all the listeners would have been hanging on every word. And then we checked the recording and we had some audio technical issues.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Which really rendered the episode unlistenable, didn't it? You just couldn't make sense of it.
That's correct. And so, despite the fact that some people possibly can't make sense of my voice because of its tone and the fact that I have this accent, although you have an accent too. But yeah, this was not redeemable. And so that has gone into the archives, into a place that no one will ever get to benefit from. Well, maybe they will.
Yeah.
We'll look back to that at the end, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. So this leads us into a really interesting discussion, I think, about failure and about perceived failure and about how we should respond to it and what it means when we're endeavouring to engage in some sort of significant effort in our daily lives. So I'd love to have a discussion about that because I think there's quite a few things that we can collectively learn from that one experience of failure.
Oh, absolutely. And I am no stranger to failure. So I'll make that declaration up front. So I'm very, very interested to get the perspective of a psychologist on perhaps where I'm going wrong or where I'm going right. But yeah, look, I think this whole idea of failure, really interesting. And even using that word failure, perhaps we could start off with a discussion of that.
Yeah, well, let's start there. What do you think about using the word failure to describe an effort that you made to do something that didn't quite get you to where you wanted to be?
Yeah. Do you know what? We'll loop back to this at some point, but I have a completely different perspective on this whole concept of failure. So I don't like it as a word. I try not to use it. I certainly don't. I try not to apply it to myself and the stories I tell myself about the things that maybe I've pursued and haven't come off. It's been really quite interesting, and I know the person was a real catalyst for this for me in this regard. But I just adopted a perspective probably about a decade ago that I'm here to learn. And in fact, that's probably one of my primary mantras nowadays. I'm here to learn. And it's hard, but I've actually found it quite rewarding and very encouraging to, when things don't go to plan, my instant response is, okay, what do I learn from that? What can I learn from that? So I think that, it hasn't been an intentional thing not to include that in my vernacular, but I think that I definitely am not a big fan of the word failure.
So I used to have a very similar view. For many years, I had a very similar view, but I will say that in recent years, I think I've become more comfortable with the idea of failure and with using the word failure. And in particular, I wonder if both failure and learning can happily coexist. Can we say, yes, I've failed and I've learned? And my sense is we can say that. And
Well,
in fact,
this begs
no, go ahead, go ahead.
this begs an interesting question: is why? And I haven't examined myself on this, but why do I have a reluctance to use that term then? Obviously,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
negative connotations for most people, and even a derogatory way of referring to someone as a failure.
yeah,
So it's not
yeah,
like it's a beacon of yes, I failed, or
yeah,
failure. Yes, I want to embrace that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
why is that? Where's that coming from?
Yeah, yeah. It's a why do we put so much store in the idea of
Mm,
success? And if you think about it, being successful at something probably isn't going to happen that often. I mean, it certainly doesn't happen that
mm,
often. For example, in nature, you think of a tree that flowers and drops seeds on the ground. What percentage of those seeds themselves actually grow into strong trees?
mm,
What percentage of genetic adaptations simply die out because they don't do something useful for the creature that they belong to? So the idea of things not working and not working well seems to be simply part of daily living. Yet,
mm.
as humans, we've invested a lot of value in the idea of seeing failure as a bad thing and something to be avoided. So I wonder whether, at least in part, we ought to be becoming friends with failure. We ought to be
Mm.
approaching failure as something really almost to be celebrated.
Yeah. Well, I think that obviously where it cuts is our self-esteem and our sense of identity, perhaps our sense of worth. I can resonate with that, particularly not so as I said, probably maybe as I'm getting older, I just don't care what people think of me so much. And that's not necessarily a bad place to be in either. But I have this vivid memory of about would have been maybe 15 years ago now. And it's actually one of person that I look up to in such high regard. This is Professor Gary Egger, and he's considered in Australia to be sort of one of the fathers of lifestyle medicine. But I
Mm.
remember the first time I ever met him, and I knew about his work, and I held him in very high regard back then, even though I hadn't met him personally. And I was a relatively junior academic, and so here I was, and I had this meeting. I remember we went to this boardroom, and there were a whole lot of these professors, and as I said, I was fairly junior. I just sort of sat there, tried not to say anything stupid, and I sat in this room, and there was this really interesting dynamic because you had these people, within academia, they were all trying to be the smartest person in the room. And they're
Mm.
spruiking these things and they're saying words that, and they're talking about biochemical pathways and da 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 da. And it was very educational for me. Anyway, but you could tell there was just this sort of puff the chest out, everyone talking and trying to be that smartest person in the room. And then Gary, I remember this very vividly. Gary had this. He paused for a moment at one point in time, and he was probably the most intelligent person in the room.
Yeah.
And he paused and he said, "You know what? This has been a fantastic discussion today." He said, and he pointed out a couple of people, and he said, "I've really enjoyed listening to you. I hadn't heard about those things before. I've learnt a lot." I remember him saying these words, and it's actually was it changed the trajectory of many things for me because what it did, I remember looking at him thinking, "Whoa, wait a sec." An academic just confessed that they didn't know things in the first instance, but he was obviously very teachable, and curious and was willing to acknowledge that, obviously comfortable enough in his own self-esteem and identity.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
but what I remember that what I did think, I thought, and I don't respect that him any less for saying that. It's not like all of a sudden I thought, oh, he doesn't know stuff. I
yeah,
actually
yeah.
he actually went up in my estimation. And
Well, I
and
was
it
going
was
to say,
actually
it sounds like you respect him even more.
I do,
Yeah,
and it actually changed the way that I have done business, as live,
yeah,
approached life since then. I actually, as I said earlier, my mantra is I'm here to learn, and I
yeah,
actually
yeah,
I don't want to be the smartest person in a room because I'm not going to learn when I'm talking. Well, I'm not going to learn as much
yeah,
as listening. So yeah, and I think
Yeah,
once again it builds up, it feeds into that idea of your self-esteem, and if you're needing accolades, if you're needing success in order to feel valuable and worthy, then obviously failure is going to be something you will resist.
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
if you're in a
absolutely.
sort of a fairly solid spot and realize that, your self-worth isn't built upon what we can achieve or earn or, do, then all of a sudden you're a whole lot more robust, and the idea of things won't always work out. And in fact, maybe it's a
Yeah,
really good thing if they don't always work out,
yeah,
because we
absolutely.
will learn a lot from that.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So the idea of the idea that having a robust self-esteem
Mm.
in some ways makes us maybe a little more adventurous, maybe helps us to take a few more risks because what's at stake doesn't seem so high. If that doesn't
Yeah,
work, if we fail, it's not such a big deal. I,
yeah,
I I love that. I love that perspective that you just introduced of the possibility of the failure being something useful and helpful. And if I look back across the trajectory of my career, I very nearly when I finished university the first time, I very nearly became a career radio broadcaster. I loved radio. I still love radio.
mm,
And I went to film, TV, and radio school, uh, but I didn't finish it. And and part of the reason for that was that I didn't like the milieu of commercial radio. I enjoyed interview radio. I enjoyed discussions with people, but I didn't like the kind of hard sell of commercial radio. Uh, and then I worked briefly in a commercial radio station. Didn't like it and left and never pursued that again as a career. And at the time, I was quite, um, I was devastated's too strong a word, but I was saddened, I guess, that hadn't come to pass. Fast forward, I don't know, 25 years. I'd been a psychologist for, I don't know, maybe a dozen years or something, and I was starting to feel the wear of that, and I got this idea that I wanted to be an airline pilot. So I already held a pilot's license and various other endorsements and so on. I'd completed all my examinations to become an airline pilot. So I started the recruitment process with an airline, and then in 2007, which is when I was doing this, the global financial crisis struck, and of course airlines around the world immediately stopped recruiting.
mm.
Uh, and by that stage, I was already 40, maybe 41 years old. And by the time all that kind of swung back around again a few years later, I was maybe 45, 46, something like that. So I didn't end up pursuing that. And at the time, I did feel quite devastated about that. And I did feel like, maybe if I'd tried a bit harder, maybe if I'd pushed a bit more, maybe if I don't know, I don't know what I was thinking, but I was really disappointed that hadn't come to pass. Fast forward another 15 or 16 years, I got off a flight from the US at the beginning of this year, and I was standing at the baggage carousel, and the flight crew was standing next to me. And in particular, the second officer. Now, the second officer is the position that I was recruiting for in the airline. The second officer has two stripes on the shoulder, and the second officer is kind of a standby pilot for the times when either the captain or the first officer are unavailable and off the flight deck. Second officer can only operate the aircraft above 10,000 feet. So it really is it's a significant learning and development role, but it's relatively junior in the scheme of things. I got chatting to the second officer, and I said, "Oh, how long have you been an SO for?" And he said, 15 years.
Oh wow.
And I quickly did the maths, and 15 years was pretty much the time that I was recruiting, and I suddenly had this moment of realizing that had I been successful in
Mm,
recruiting to the airlines, that probably would have still been me. I would have been a 57-year-old second officer. And I think that would have disappointed me even more.
Mm.
That I'd spent all those years not progressing in the way that I would have hoped to progress. So I look back on those times now, and I really genuinely am thankful that neither of those opportunities grew into anything. In a sense that I failed at both of those attempts to launch a different career,
Mm.
because I'm now in a place where, well, for a starter, I get to talk to you all the time, so that's
And
that's nice.
you're using your radio voice as well.
True,
You know,
true.
I really like hearing and I like sharing those sorts of stories. And I do this with my kids. Like my original career path was to be a stockman. Now these are riding wild horses up in the highlands of Victoria. I watched The Man from Snowy River when that movie came out. And I thought, yes, that's for me. And so I remember I would go, and I've always been quite driven to go after my goals. So I actually went straw. I used to go pick mushrooms. I didn't actually know what mushrooms were, which ones were palatable and which ones were very dangerous, but I'd pick them nonetheless.
Oh,
And then I'd sell them on the side of the road and get horse riding lessons. Well, it didn't take long for me to figure out that horses hate me. I got bucked off so many times, kicked it, bitten by horses, and I had to depart from this dream of being Man from Snow River and galloping down that crazy steep hill like he did in the movie. But you know what? As I've gone through life, I think I've said yes to a lot of things, and a lot of things I've learned. That my best learnings probably are things I'm not good at. Well, certainly one of
yeah,
the best
yeah,
things, and I actually like to share those stories with my kids. Like I
yeah,
tell them about the times that I tried that. I'm not good at that, and I think it's taken a long time, perhaps decades for me, but to get to the point where I now know what to say no to, because I know that's not within my signature strengths. I've tried that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
wasn't so great at
yeah,
that. It was a really good learning to learn that I'm not that great
yeah.
at that. So I'll focus my attention, my efforts, and energies in the things that I know that I am more likely to be successful at. Maybe this is looping back to self-esteem issues. I don't know.
Well, maybe, but even that's an interesting perspective, isn't it? Because the more that you say yes to things,
Mm,
statistically, the more failures you're likely to have.
yes,
Um,
yes.
I mean that's just the way of life.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
Yeah,
We know that failure seems to be woven into the fabric of life. It's in many ways an expected event. And so the more that you grab hold of life and the more that you try and dive into it, the more
yeah,
times you're going to have those experiences of frustration, of setback, of failure, of disappointment.
yeah,
And if you can orientate your mindset to one in which, first of all, you see those things as normal, and secondly, as you've said, you look for opportunities to extract some learning from that,
yeah.
then I think you're probably setting up really nicely to to move through life, becoming wiser as you go over the years. Um, the other thing I like about the learning perspective that we're talking about is if we choose to use the word failure, and we've talked about this. I've come to quite like using the word failure.
Mm,
I don't mind it, but learning is the redemption of that failure. Um,
mm,
and I like the word redemption for various reasons. Etymologically, it means a buying back of something. When you redeem, you buy something back. And so when we learn something, we've, in a sense, bought back that failure, and
mm.
it kind of no longer counts. It's not listed on the ledger of debt anymore.
Mm.
because we've taken it back, and that's the opportunity that learning provides. And in fact, of course, in a health coaching context, so thinking about behavioural change in healthcare, one of the really important questions to ask when you're working with a patient or client, and for example, reviewing progress towards a goal that they've been working on, one of the really important questions to ask is, what are you learning along the way? Or what
Yeah.
did you learn from doing that? To really give that person the opportunity to reflect on and articulate the learning that they've made here.
I love that. And I love that redemption word. I think that's really powerful. It's like it's bringing back the success, or redeeming that failure, if you, in a sense. But I think even beyond that, there is actually a beauty in the journey of challenging yourself and and missing the mark, but then having to strive to get there again. And I think I do. I mean, I have a real heart for young people. Obviously, I've got young people myself, and I find myself very intentionally on the front foot, sharing with them in my story and my journey, the challenges that I face and when they don't go to plan. And I want I want my kids to see me doing it tough at times. I don't want it
Yeah,
to
yeah,
appear to be a breeze through, like kicking goals all the way around. And so, like, for example, obviously I run, a social enterprise, the Lift Project. And for me, that's been a journey way outside my comfort zone, because I have never had any aspiration to run a business as such. And I knew that this was going to be a lot of learning for me. And so right along the way, right from the outset, I would talk to my kids about, hey, what's going well, what's not going well. Hey, here's the challenge. I want them to see that, because I think that, we in social media nowadays, apart from, there's actually a whole channel dedicated to what they call Fail Army. So you can actually get on and just see
oh
people,
yeah,
yeah, people
yeah,
axing themselves left and right. And, there's, but what is more appealing is people only ever see the end results. So they either they hold up in lights the
yeah,
success stories,
yeah,
or they hold
yeah,
up that, hey, that went real bad. Look at that, and we'll have a laugh. And then, well, hopefully we don't laugh too much at other people's misfortune. But what we don't see is the bit in the middle.
yeah,
The striving, and
yeah,
I love that whole quote. The Theodore Roosevelt quote, that quote about that. The person in the arena.
yeah,
There's something in that striving valiantly. And he finishes this quote by saying, that those who are in the arena that are actually doing it tough, that are struggle, but keep pushing on, their place will never be amongst those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. I like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Victory or defeat is actually
yeah,
better than nothing. And so,
yeah,
actually, it's so I actually intentionally choose things that I know are going to be hard. And so,
yeah,
and often it's in the sporting context. I have this. I do wonder at times that if we don't choose our challenges, maybe our challenges get chosen for us. And so I try to pick things that are hard for me to do. And my latest was I wanted to learn how to. I don't know if you've seen. You can get like surfboards now that have a foil shape, like an airplane
oh
wing
yeah,
underneath,
yeah,
and you can stand on a dock like a jetty and then push that thing, jump on it, and then pump up and down and make it go. And it's really hard, and I know it's really hard. And so I thought, I'm going to learn it. So I actually got one of these things, and I watched YouTube videos ad nauseum, trying to figure out the technique for this thing. And there was all these young guys who go, well, all you do is jump, push that thing, jump on, and then that's it. Like, and I'm thinking, no, like this. And then I saw this one video that caught my attention, and it was a guy, and it said, my first 200 attempts. This is the name of the video. My first 200 attempts at dock starting a foil board. Anyway, I watched this, and it's just from attempt one, splat. Attempt two, splat. Other direction, splat, 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 splat. And he's got this in fast motion. But and I looked at this, and towards the end, after about 150 attempts, you see him just sort of get a semi rhythm going, and by the 200th attempt, he still hasn't got it, but he's getting closer. And I
mm,
watched this thing, and I thought, I don't disrespect this guy any
Yeah.
any at all. In fact, I look at this guy and I say, he's in the arena. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's struggling, and I value that. So,
Yeah.
I want young people to know that, you know, that there's
Absolutely.
value
Yeah.
in whether it's a failed attempt or a successful attempt. The
Yeah.
attempt. Let's applaud the attempt. There's real
Yeah.
value in that.
And that swings us, I think, to one last perspective that I'd love to talk about in relation to this, and that is when perseverance becomes perseveration. Um,
Mm,
when should we pull the pin? When should we say,
yeah.
that's it? I have failed here. I'm simply not going to make any more effort. And again, I think this in part comes back to our discussion about esteem and efficacy. When we feel efficacious about something, we're more likely to work hard at it and probably perform quite well because we have the underlying skill set to be able to do that. When our esteem is high, we're more likely to continue to experience some failures along the way because that's okay. Failures are not the end of anything if you're feeling like your self-esteem is intact and robust. However, is there a time to pull the pin? Is there a time when perseverance really starts to develop a dark edge to it and
Mm,
is not actually helpful to us anymore? Is there a
mm,
time when we should be saying, I've failed. I failed at this, and I'm just not going to try at this anymore. I'm going to stop trying to, ride a foil board or ride a
mm,
skateboard or, learn to paint horses or landscapes or, use a wood lathe or whatever it might be. Um,
mm,
I have a sense that we ought to be doing that we ought to be having
mm.
some line in the sand that says, you know what, this isn't for me.
Mm. Do some sort of stock take process. I like that. It's interesting in the business world, you know, which I'm learning a lot about. There's an interesting book called The Lean Startup, and they speak to this a little bit. They talk about what you need to do is try something, and then if it works, keep doing it, persist. If it doesn't, then pivot. And they just talk about this constant process of persist or pivot, persist or pivot, persist or pivot, and try things in the meantime. Just keep trying new things,
Yeah,
research, learn, and you know, some will fail, so pivot. If it doesn't, then persist. But I spoke with someone who's, you know, well versed in the business world one time, and they said there is a third option too. There's persist, pivot, or pull the pin. You know, and
ah,
so this is an
yeah,
insightful question. When is that? You know,
yeah,
when and you know, I'm hoping that you're not posing the question. I hope you've actually got a good response, because once again, I'm here to learn. But yeah, it's worth begging the question. When is it that you
yeah,
say,
yeah.
okay, where is that line?
And I'm not sure that we can say that there's a particular time or place or circumstance in which we should always pull the pin, but we should be alert to and ready for that time to come, and be prepared to recognise it when it presents itself to it, which might present itself, um, as a result of some external factors. For example, if we to use the business example, if you run out of funding sources to do something, well, maybe that's time to pull the pin. Maybe you have a realization that that you're not developing the skills in the way that you would like to, or at the pace you would like to.
Mm,
Maybe someone else beats you to it. Maybe someone else gets in there before you and
mm,
does what you were aiming to do, and so the value in you doing it is no longer there. So I think there are lots of reasons why we might pull the pin. Um, the important thing, I think, though, is to recognise that third option exists. Um,
exists. I like that, and I agree with
Persisting
that.
is good, pivoting is good, and
Yeah,
pulling the pin is good in its
yeah,
own context as well. Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
maybe for me, maybe part of the decision making sort of triaging process in that is identifying your why. Like, why are you doing this in the first place? And
yeah,
and
yeah,
and for me, if it's really built around, I'm trying to do this because I need this for my self-esteem. Well, maybe that's not entirely a healthy approach, and maybe there are other ways that you could build your self-esteem.
yeah,
If it's like I'm thinking, sort of I'm doing a self-exploration at the moment, but I think in the context of the social enterprise that I'm running, people have said to me, "Oh, how long will you persist for?" And I almost feel like for me, it's not really an option that I wouldn't persist. I'll always be striving for the same thing in a different format. If it has to
hmm
change,
yeah,
but for me, it's not about it's my self esteem is not tied to it at all. I actually just
yeah,
feel impressed that that's what I'm meant to do, and
yeah,
so I think maybe there's a bit of that in it. Maybe identifying your why and getting really good clarity
yeah,
around that might be helpful in that process of
yeah, yeah.
deciding when to pull the pin.
And if we think about a lifestyle medicine context and the sorts of health behaviour changes that people engage in, um,
Mm,
what can we learn about that from this discussion? Well, I think one of the learnings is first of all that failures along the way are to be
mm,
expected,
yes.
and possibly as health professionals as well, it could be useful to predict those to our patients and clients, um,
Yeah.
to help them develop if you like, the right expectation about what's to come.
Yes.
Um, I think another takeaway for me in this area is the idea that there is always an opportunity to either pick up where you left off or start over again.
Yeah.
So failures are failures, but we don't ever run out of time to start again, try again, uh, and see what we can do next time. And that might mean pivoting. It might mean persevering. It might mean pulling the pin and
Mm.
stepping away from something and then refocusing on something else altogether to move
Yeah.
forward with. But I
I
think
remember.
for me, the really important thing is that opportunity always sits there. The opportunity to start over
Yes.
is always there.
I like that. And I remember in Australia we had the smoking cessation promotion one time, and the advertisement said, "Never quit on quitting." The idea
Yeah,
that
yeah,
okay, yeah, there's failure is going to be part of it, and I think accepting that, recognizing that, understanding that up front, and as health professionals, we look at things like the trans theoretical model. We know that you've got through contemplation to action, preparations in there. Relapse, it's part of the
yeah,
model. It's so
yeah,
predictable. This is what we
yeah,
expect, but you can get back on that circuit and again. So there's always hope.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's what it speaks to me. And in those failures, if we call them those, to always be asking the question, "Well, what went wrong?" And what could I learn from that, so that I can preempt it perhaps for next time, so that I don't make
yeah,
those same
yeah,
mistakes, which might lead to that same outcome. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So let me come back to a very important question then.
Mm.
What what are we going to do about our failed podcast episode?
We are going to re-record it, and it's going to be even better.
And this next episode, now that I know you wanted to be the man from Snowy River, but you didn't become the man from Snowy River, I think there's an opportunity to introduce you in the next podcast episode as the man from Dora Creek.
That is exactly what I am. Slightly less spectacular, but I'm going to own it.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.